The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, a relentless force that seemed determined to bury everything under its icy grip. Dane Carter could barely see through the thick wall of snow swirling around him. His visor was covered in frost, his suit's temperature gauge flashing red warnings. Hypothermia was setting in. His ship had crashed hours ago, leaving him stranded on this desolate planet. The emergency systems had failed, and his distress beacon wasn't sending any signals. He was alone, lost in an alien blizzard with no sign of shelter. His fingers felt numb inside his gloves, his breath coming out in shallow gasps. He couldn't last much longer. Dane forced himself forward, one step at a time. The snow was knee-deep, making every movement feel like wading through thick mud. His mind screamed at him to stop, to rest just for a moment. But he knew that was a death sentence. He had read survival manuals before. He knew that freezing to death often felt like falling asleep, and he couldn't afford to sleep. Then something moved in the distance. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. The white landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged ice formations. But then he saw it again, a shadowy figure walking through the storm. Dane tried to call out, but his voice was weak, barely more than a whisper against the roaring wind. Was it another survivor? A native of this planet? Or something worse? The figure came closer, revealing itself to be tall and covered in heavy furs, wrapped tightly around its body. Glowing amber eyes peered at him from beneath the hood, watching him intently. It wasn't human. Dane's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs barely obeyed. He stumbled and collapsed into the snow, his body too cold to continue. His vision blurred, the cold sinking deep into his bones. This was it. He was going to die on an unknown planet, and no one would ever find him. But instead of leaving him, the figure moved closer. A pair of strong hands grabbed his arms, pulling him up effortlessly. Dane blinked in confusion as he felt warmth, real warmth, coming from the stranger's touch. The alien woman, because now he could see she was female, muttered something in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was firm, yet calm, as if she had done this before. Before he could react, she threw one of his arms over her shoulder and started dragging him through the snow. Dane barely had the strength to protest. His mind screamed at him to be wary, but his body welcomed the warmth. Wherever she was taking him, it had to be better than freezing to death. Inside the hut, Dane faded in and out of consciousness as the alien woman pulled him through the storm. He caught glimpses of dark shapes, towering ice cliffs, and what looked like massive bones half buried in the snow. He wasn't sure how far they traveled, but at some point, the howling wind stopped. He felt solid ground beneath him, no longer covered in deep snow. The air was warmer, though still cold by Earth standards. He forced his eyes open just enough to see a small, rough-looking hut made from ice, stone, and fur-covered wood. The woman dragged him inside, shutting the door behind them. Dane felt an immediate difference. The temperature inside was significantly higher, thanks to a fire burning in the center of the room. The flickering flames cast long shadows on the walls, revealing strange carvings etched into the stone. Dane didn't have time to study them. His body craved heat more than answers. He shivered uncontrollably, even as the alien woman knelt beside him, pulling his frost-covered gloves off. Dane expected her touch to be cold, but it was the opposite. Her hands were strangely warm, almost unnaturally so. She pressed her palm to his forehead, frowning slightly, as if trying to determine something. Where am I? Dane finally managed to whisper, his voice hoarse. The alien woman didn't respond. Instead, she removed her thick fur cloak, revealing a lean, strong figure beneath. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, marked with faint glowing lines that pulsed slightly, as if responding to the fire's heat. She wore simple, hand-stitched clothes, clearly made from local materials. Dane tried to sit up, but his body betrayed him, still too weak. The woman sighed, and before he could object, she grabbed a thick animal pelt and wrapped it around him tightly. Dane blinked in surprise. For an alien, she was being oddly kind. The moment of understanding. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound being the crackling fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. Dane's mind slowly cleared as his body absorbed the warmth. His fingers tingled painfully as circulation returned, but he welcomed the discomfort. It meant he was alive. The alien woman sat across from him, watching him closely. Her eyes reflected the firelight, intelligent and unreadable. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "You, human." Dane's breath caught in his throat. She knew his species. It wasn't perfect English, but it was enough to make his heart pound. How did she know that word? Had she encountered humans before? Or was this planet more connected to Earth than he realized? Before he could ask, she reached behind her and pulled something from the shadows, a strange artifact, glowing faintly with a familiar energy. Dane's blood turned cold. The object looked ancient, but he recognized the markings. They were human symbols, and that meant one thing. Humans had been here before. The fire crackled softly, filling the small hut with warmth. Dane Carter sat wrapped in a thick pelt, his body still shaking from the cold, but at least he was alive. Across from him, the alien woman sat in silence, watching him with curious amber eyes. She was different from anything Dane had ever seen. Blue skin with faint glowing lines, strong but lean, dressed in clothing made from animal hides. There was something strange about her, something familiar yet completely alien. But what shook him most was the object in her hands. It was a small metal artifact, covered in symbols that looked human. Dane's heart pounded as he stared at it. His fingers ached to touch it, to confirm what his eyes were seeing. "Where did you get that?" His voice was hoarse, weak from exhaustion. The alien woman tilted her head, as if trying to understand his words. Then she did something unexpected. She slowly slid the artifact across the floor towards him. Dane hesitated, then reached out and picked it up. The metal was smooth and cold, but as soon as his fingers wrapped around it, the symbols faintly glowed. A soft hum vibrated through his hand. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just any human object. This was old Earth technology. Dane swallowed hard. How was this here? Had humans been on this planet before? He looked up at the alien woman, his mind racing. "This is from my people," he said slowly, tapping the artifact. "Human." Her glowing lines pulsed slightly, and her expression shifted to something like realization. "You, human," she repeated, the word rough on her tongue. Dane nodded, watching her closely. She knew the word. That meant she had either seen humans before or had learned about them. The woman stood up and walked to the back of the hut, where a large fur curtain hung from the ceiling. She pulled it aside, revealing strange markings carved into the wall. Dane's eyes widened. The carvings weren't just random shapes. They were stories. Drawings of ships, of humans standing beside figures that looked like her. His blood turned cold. Humans had been here before. The past beneath the ice. Dane pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the dizziness that followed. He stepped closer to the wall, running his fingers over the carvings. The images told a story of arrival, survival, and something else. There were ships in the sky, but there was also a battle. Figures, clearly human, were shown fighting something large and monstrous. Then, a final carving showed a ship buried under ice, abandoned. Dane turned back to the alien woman. "How long have you had this?" he asked, holding up the artifact. She didn't answer, but instead motioned for him to follow her. Dane hesitated. He was still weak, and stepping outside into the cold again was not a good idea. But something in her expression told him that whatever she wanted to show him, it was important. He wrapped the thick pelt around himself and followed her. A journey into the storm. The wind hit him the moment they stepped outside, though it was weaker than before. The storm had calmed, but the temperature was still brutal. The alien woman walked ahead confidently, her movements swift and unnatural for the icy terrain. Dane struggled to keep up, his boots sinking into the snow. After what felt like an eternity, she finally stopped. They stood before a massive ice cliff, towering above them. The alien woman knelt and brushed away layers of snow, revealing something buried beneath. Dane stepped closer, and his breath caught in his throat. Beneath the ice, barely visible but unmistakable, was the metallic hull of a human spaceship, a crashed Earth vessel. Dane's hands trembled as he touched the ice. The metal was smooth, cold, and unmistakably human-made. His reflection stared back at him, eyes wide with disbelief. His mind raced with questions. How long had this been here? Who had been on this ship? Did they survive? And if they didn't, what happened to them? He turned back to the alien woman, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. "You knew humans were here before." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt and placed a hand against the ice, her glowing lines flashing softly. Then she finally spoke. "My people, remember. Secrets of the past." Dane stared at her, his heart pounding. Her people remembered humans. That meant they had been here for a long time, long enough to pass down stories. But how? Dane asked, struggling to understand. "How do you know about humans? What happened to them?" The alien woman didn't respond immediately. She reached into a small pouch tied to her waist and pulled out a second artifact, a small metal badge. Dane's stomach dropped. He recognized it immediately. It was an old Earth military insignia, worn by soldiers from the first deep space expeditions. Dane's heart raced. This was proof. Humans had not only been here before, they had fought here. The realization sent chills down his spine. If there had been a fight, it meant there was an enemy. Something out there had forced the humans to stay. His eyes darted back to the ice-covered ship, and a horrifying thought entered his mind. What if the thing they fought was still here? Dane turned to the alien woman, gripping the artifact tightly. "What happened to them?" he asked again, his voice urgent. She exhaled slowly, her amber eyes darkening. "They never left." Dane's blood ran cold. Beneath them, the ice groaned. Something deep below was still alive. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Dane Carter stood frozen in place, his breath coming out in uneven puffs. His fingers clutched the ancient Earth military insignia, the metal cold even through his gloves. His mind raced. Humans had been here before. The wreckage of their crashed ship lay beneath the ice, forgotten by time. And now, the alien woman, Selah, as he had started calling her in his mind, had just spoken words that sent chills down his spine. They never left. Dane swallowed hard. "What do you mean by that?" His voice was tense. "If they never left, then where are they?" Selah's glowing amber eyes flickered as she looked at the icy ground beneath their feet. Her posture was tense, her breathing steady but controlled. For the first time, Dane noticed something in her expression. Fear. "They are trapped," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. Dane's heartbeat quickened. "Trapped." Selah turned her head slightly, her gaze shifting toward the massive ice cliff that towered over them. The frozen hull of the human spaceship was still visible beneath layers of ice, but now Dane noticed something else. Strange, deep cracks in the glacier, as if something had tried to break free. "The ice keeps them in," Selah continued. "It has for a long time." Dane felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. He had assumed the humans had died in the crash centuries ago. But this was something different. Something worse. "Are you saying?" He hesitated, his mouth dry. "Some of them are still alive." Selah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt down and placed her bare hand against the ice. Her glowing skin pulsed slightly, and a faint hum vibrated through the air. Then, a sound came from beneath them, a low, distant groan. Dane took a step back, his heart hammering. The ice was moving. The warning from the past. Dane clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "Sayla," he said, kneeling beside her. "Tell me everything. What happened here?" She hesitated, then finally spoke. "A long time ago, your kind came here from the stars," she said. "They were explorers, warriors. My ancestors were different then. Scared, weak, struggling to survive in the cold." Dane listened carefully. "They did not speak our language, but they helped us. They shared their fire, their tools, their knowledge." She placed a hand over the insignia in Dane's palm. "They saved my people." Dane exhaled slowly. So the first humans here had helped Sayla's ancestors survive. That meant there had once been peace between them. But then, she continued, her voice darkening, something came from the deep. Dane frowned. "What do you mean?" Sayla turned her gaze toward the endless ice fields, where distant shadows twisted in the wind. "The ice is old," she said. "Older than my people. Older than yours. But something sleeps beneath it, something that should not wake." Dane's chest tightened. "The humans fought it," she whispered. "But they lost." The buried horror. Dane gritted his teeth, glancing at the cracked ice beneath them. If the first humans lost, that meant whatever they fought was still here. Still waiting. "Sayla," he said, his voice firm. "What exactly is under the ice?" She hesitated, then spoke one word. "Hungry." Dane felt his stomach drop. Before he could ask more, the ground beneath them trembled. Not a small shift, not a weak vibration. This was something huge moving beneath the surface. Dane grabbed Sayla's arm and pulled her back as the cracks in the ice spread rapidly, glowing with an eerie blue light. And then, it happened. A deep, inhuman growl echoed from below, vibrating through the frozen wasteland. The ice beneath their feet shifted violently, as if something was trying to break through. Dane's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. Through the deep cracks in the ice, he saw something move. Something massive. Something alive. Sayla grabbed his arm. "We must go. Now." But Dane couldn't look away. Because through the ice, he saw a shape, twisting, shifting, and growing. And then, an eye opened. A massive, pale, lifeless eye, staring directly at him through the ice. And it was waking up. "Escape into the storm. Run," Sayla shouted, pulling Dane with unnatural strength. The ground cracked beneath them, sending ice shards flying through the air. The frozen metal of the buried human ship groaned and shifted, as if being pulled down. Dane's legs finally obeyed, and he ran as fast as he could, the freezing wind cutting against his face. Behind them, the ice continued to crack apart, the sound like thunder rolling through the valley. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of a deep cavern, its mouth hidden beneath layers of thick snow. Sayla pulled him inside, and they both collapsed onto the frozen ground, gasping for breath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Dane finally turned to her. "What the hell was that?" Sayla's eyes glowed softly in the darkness, her face shadowed by the dim light of the cavern. "A mistake," she whispered. "A mistake your people tried to fix, but failed." Dane wiped the sweat from his forehead, despite the cold. If the first humans had tried to stop this thing and failed, then that meant only one thing. It was up to him now. And if they didn't stop it in time, nothing on this planet would survive. Dane Carter sat against the icy wall of the cavern, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to catch his breath. His fingers were still trembling, not from the cold, but from the thing he had just seen beneath the ice. A massive, pale eye staring at him. It hadn't been human. It hadn't been anything he could recognize. And worse, it had moved. Sayla knelt nearby, her amber eyes still glowing faintly in the darkness. Her expression was tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't afraid of much. Dane could tell that about her already, but whatever was buried beneath the ice, she feared it. Dane exhaled, trying to keep his voice steady. What was that thing? Sayla was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke softly. Something. Ancient. Older than my people. Older than yours. Dane's heart pounded in his chest. My people tried to stop it, didn't they? Sayla gave a slow nod. Long ago, when the first humans came to this planet, they awakened something they did not understand. A creature that had been sleeping beneath the ice for centuries. Dane gritted his teeth, and they couldn't kill it. She shook her head. They tried. They fought. But in the end, they could only trap it beneath the ice. Dane ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. His ancestors had come here, fought some kind of ancient monster, and lost. If it was still alive, that meant their efforts had only delayed the inevitable. And now the ice was cracking. The creature was waking up. A forgotten battlefield. Dane forced himself to his feet, brushing the snow off his suit. We need to find out more, he said, turning to Sayla. If my people couldn't kill it, we need to understand what went wrong. Sayla studied him for a moment, then nodded. I know where to go. She led him deeper into the cavern, her footsteps silent against the frozen ground. The walls were lined with strange markings, ancient carvings left behind by her people. Dane recognized some human symbols mixed in, scratched into the stone long ago. Then they stepped into a massive underground chamber. Dane's breath caught. Rusting human technology was scattered across the ice-covered floor. Old weapons, shattered armor, and the remains of robotic drones. This place wasn't just a cave. It was a battlefield. Dane stepped forward carefully, his eyes scanning the debris. He picked up a piece of an old energy rifle, its metal worn from time but still recognizable. My ancestors fought here, Sayla said quietly, side by side with yours. Dane turned to look at her. Then why didn't they win? She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward a large object half buried in the ice. Dane narrowed his eyes and walked closer, brushing off the thick frost. His pulse spiked as the frozen metal was revealed beneath. It was a human war mech, a massive, heavily armored exosuit built for combat. The kind of machine that could have leveled cities. And it had failed. Dane took a step back, swallowing hard. If his people had deployed something this powerful, and it still hadn't been enough, what chance did he have? The warning left behind. Sayla reached into her pouch and pulled out a small metallic device. She pressed a button on its surface, and a holographic recording flickered to life. Dane's breath caught as a human figure appeared. An old recording, left behind by one of the original soldiers. The man's face was tired, his uniform torn, his eyes filled with desperation. This is Commander Jack Reeves, the recording crackled. If anyone finds this, it means the ice is breaking. And if the ice is breaking, he took a shaky breath. Then we failed. Dane's stomach tightened. The hologram continued. We came here looking for a new home. We didn't know we had stepped onto a graveyard. Reeves' voice grew weaker. The creature isn't just alive, it's intelligent. It learned from our attacks. It adapted. Dane felt a chill crawl up his spine. We tried everything, guns, explosives, plasma weaponry. Nothing worked. It's like the ice itself protects it. Reeves' face darkened. If this thing gets out, it won't stop. It doesn't just kill. It absorbs. Dane's mouth went dry. Reeves looked directly into the camera. If you're hearing this, don't fight it. Bury it. Run. Because if it wakes up, the recording cut off. Silence filled the chamber. Dane clenched his fists. The old commander had left a warning. But Dane knew running wasn't an option anymore. The ice was already breaking. And this time, there was no army, no war mechs, no backup. There was only him and Sayla. The ice awakens. A sudden rumble shook the cavern. Sayla tensed, her eyes snapping upward. It's moving. Dane didn't need to ask what it meant. The ice above them cracked sharply, sending pieces of frost tumbling to the ground. A deep, thunderous groan echoed through the cavern walls. Dane grabbed Sela's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." They sprinted toward the tunnel entrance, their breath misting in the freezing air. Behind them, the sound of shifting ice grew louder. And then, a deafening roar shook the entire cavern. Dane stumbled, nearly falling as the ground beneath him lurched violently. The creature was waking up. As they reached the entrance, Sela turned back for one last look. Her glowing eyes widened in horror. Dane followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. Through the cracking ice, something massive was pushing upward, a shape covered in thick frost and impossible darkness. And as another ear-splitting roar echoed through the cavern, Dane realized the horrifying truth. It was no longer trapped. It was free. A deafening roar filled the cavern, shaking the ground beneath Dane Carter's feet. Cracks spread across the frozen walls like spiderwebs, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an ancient, unnatural force. Dane's breath caught as he watched a massive shape push against the ice from below. It wasn't fully visible yet, only a dark, shifting form beneath the frozen surface, but its presence alone made his skin crawl. Sela grabbed his wrist. "We need to move." Dane barely had time to react before she pulled him forward, leading him through the tunnels. His boots slid on the icy ground, but he forced himself to keep up. Behind them, the cracks deepened, and chunks of ice fell from the ceiling. The creature beneath the glacier was waking up, and it was breaking free. The chase through the caverns. Dane's heart pounded as he ran after Sela, the cold air burning his lungs. The cavern walls were narrow and twisting, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. A sudden boom echoed behind them. Dane risked a glance over his shoulder, and his stomach dropped. A massive claw, black and jagged, tore through the ice. It was twice the size of a human, its surface glistening like frozen obsidian. The creature let out another roar, its voice deep and unnatural, shaking the tunnel like a distant earthquake. Dane turned back. Faster. Sela didn't need to be told twice. She moved effortlessly, her body adapting to the icy terrain in a way that Dane could barely keep up with. The tunnel twisted sharply, and Sela suddenly skidded to a stop. Dane nearly crashed into her. "Why did you stop?" Then he saw why. The path ahead had collapsed, a jagged drop leading into complete darkness. Dane's chest tightened. No, no, no. The sound of shattering ice behind them grew louder. The creature was coming. A desperate leap. Dane turned to Sela. "We have to jump." Sela's glowing amber eyes narrowed. Too dangerous. Dane clenched his fists. They didn't have time to argue. If they waited any longer, they wouldn't have a choice. Another roar split the air. Dane took a deep breath. Then, without thinking, he grabbed Sela's hand and jumped. For a terrifying moment, they were falling. The cold wind rushed past Dane's ears, and his stomach lurched as they plunged into the abyss. His grip on Sela tightened, praying they would land on something solid. Then, impact. Dane hit the ground hard, rolling onto his side. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he was alive. A second later, Sela landed gracefully beside him, barely disturbed by the fall. Dane groaned. That was unpleasant. Sela helped him to his feet. Better than dying. Dane exhaled, shaking off the pain. Yeah, can't argue with that. But before he could catch his breath, the sound of cracking ice above them sent a shiver down his spine. The creature hadn't stopped. It was still coming. The hidden chamber. Dane turned, scanning their new surroundings. The fall had dropped them into a massive underground chamber, bigger than anything they had seen before. Faint blue lights glowed along the walls. Dane's eyes widened. This is human technology. Sela frowned. What? Dane stepped forward, brushing frost off the metal structure embedded in the walls. It was ancient, but still intact. This is a research base, he realized. My people must have built it when they fought the creature. Selah studied the markings on the walls. Then maybe they left something behind to stop it. Dane's chest tightened with hope. Maybe. A loud boom echoed above them, followed by the sound of falling ice. The creature was getting closer. Dane gritted his teeth. They needed a weapon. Fast. The final message. Selah searched one side of the chamber, while Dane sprinted toward what looked like a control panel. It was old, frozen over, but if it still worked. He wiped the frost away, revealing a small display screen. To his shock, it flickered weakly to life. A distorted video played. A familiar face appeared. Commander Jack Reeves, the man from the earlier recording. His voice was weak, desperate. "If you're seeing this, then the ice is broken. We failed to kill it before. We couldn't stop it." Dane's stomach sank. "But we found a way to seal it," Reeves continued. "A weapon. A last resort." Dane leaned closer. "Come on. Tell me where it is." Reeves' expression hardened. "The weapon is buried deep beneath this chamber. But there's a catch." Dane swallowed. "Of course there is. You can only use it once," Reeves said. "And if you fail, nothing will stop that thing." The screen went dark. Dane exhaled slowly, turning to Selah. She met his gaze. "We have to find it." Another roar echoed above them. The ice shook violently. They were almost out of time. The last hope. Dane and Selah moved quickly, searching the chamber for any sign of the weapon. Then, Selah gasped. Dane spun around. "What?" She pointed. There, half buried under layers of ice, was a large metallic cylinder, marked with the Earth military insignia. Dane's heart pounded. This was it, the weapon that could stop the creature. But before he could reach it, a deafening crash filled the air. The ice above them exploded, sending shards flying in all directions. Dane barely had time to react before a massive black shape dropped into the chamber, its pale, lifeless eyes locking onto him. The creature had found them. Selah grabbed his arm. "Hurry." Dane didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the weapon, his mind racing. This was it. One chance. One shot. And if he failed, nothing would survive. Dane's heart hammered in his chest as he ran toward the metallic cylinder buried under layers of ice. The creature's pale, monstrous eyes glared at him from across the cavern, and its massive claws scraped against the floor, sending chills through the chamber. He could hear the creature's low growl reverberating in the air, shaking the walls and making the ground beneath him tremble. The creature had found them. No more time. Dane didn't look back as he grabbed the weapon, his hands trembling as he pulled it from the ice. It was heavier than he expected, and the cold of the metal felt like it was freezing his fingertips. But there was no time to think about that. The creature was getting closer. Selah was already ahead of him, moving quickly through the frozen cavern to get to a safe spot. She turned to him with urgent eyes, gesturing toward a corner of the chamber. "Use it there," she called out. "It's the only place with enough room for the blast." Dane didn't argue. He nodded quickly, then ran as fast as he could, keeping the metal cylinder firmly in his hands. The roar of the creature grew louder, closer. His pulse thudded in his ears as he reached the spot Selah had pointed to. There was barely enough space, but it was the only place where the weapon could work. He set the cylinder down in the middle of the frozen ground and pressed a button on its surface. It hummed to life with a low, deep vibration. Then, as he stepped back, a red light flashed on the weapon's control panel. The creature's growl grew into a rage-filled roar as it charged toward him. Its claws scraped the floor, sending shards of ice flying into the air. Its massive body moved faster than anything Dane had ever seen, and before he knew it, the creature was upon him, only a few feet away. Selah was there, her glowing eyes filled with determination. She grabbed Dane's arm and pulled him to the side just in time as the creature swiped its claws toward them. The strike missed by inches, but the sheer force of it sent Dane flying back. He crashed into the ice, his vision spinning. His ribs ached from the impact, and he could barely catch his breath. But he didn't have time to rest. The creature was turning toward him, its massive body blocking out the dim light of the cavern. Its eyes were fixed on him, burning with a terrifying hunger. The final stand. Dane struggled to push himself to his feet, his hand shaking as he grabbed the weapon from the ice. He had one shot, one chance to stop this monster. There was no room for error. The creature roared again, its massive claws swiping at the air, sending ice flying everywhere. It was faster than anything he had ever seen, and Dane knew that if he hesitated for even a second, it would be the end of him and Sayla. He turned to Sayla. "Get back," he shouted, pushing her away from the creature. "Get to safety." Sayla didn't argue. She moved quickly to the far side of the chamber, her glowing eyes never leaving the creature. She was ready to help, but Dane could see in her eyes that she knew the stakes. Dane focused on the weapon in his hands. The red light continued to flash as the creature advanced. The weapon had a single massive firing chamber built into its side, and Dane aimed it carefully, praying it would work. The creature lunged. Dane's breath caught. In that split second, he pulled the trigger. The power of the weapon. The world seemed to freeze. A blinding light exploded from the weapon, its energy pulsing through the air. The beam shot forward, hitting the creature square in the chest. The impact was so powerful that the creature screamed, a horrifying, guttural cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cavern. The creature staggered back, its claws scraping the ice as it tried to regain its footing. But the weapon had pierced its heart, and the energy beam continued to rip through its massive form. The creature let out one final, terrifying roar, then collapsed onto the ground with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything was still. The cavern was silent except for the soft crackling of the ice. The creature's massive form lay motionless in the center of the chamber, its once glowing eyes now dull and lifeless. Dane stood there, panting, the weapon still in his hands. The red light on the weapon dimmed, signaling that it had used its energy. The battle was over. Aftermath. Dane collapsed to his knees, the adrenaline leaving his body in waves. He could barely catch his breath as the weight of what had just happened crashed over him. The monster was dead, but at what cost? Sayla approached cautiously, her footsteps soft on the frozen ground. She stopped beside him, her amber eyes soft, but filled with something he couldn't quite read. "You did it," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. "You stopped it." Dane nodded, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. He could feel every bone in his body aching, every muscle sore from the fight. The adrenaline was fading, and all he could focus on now was the sound of his own labored breath. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Dane muttered. "How many others? How many more were there?" Sayla didn't answer, her gaze still on the fallen creature. The weapon had worked, but there were so many questions left unanswered. Why had the creature been here? Why had it been sleeping beneath the ice? And most importantly, why had humanity never been able to finish what it started? Dane shook his head. He couldn't answer those questions now. All he could focus on was the present, the battle that had just ended, and the unknown future that lay ahead. The cavern was eerily quiet. The only sound that filled the air was the soft crackling of ice as it settled after the massive battle. Dane Carter sat on the cold ground, his back resting against the smooth, icy wall. The weapon lay beside him, its once bright red light now dim and lifeless. The creature, the terror that had haunted this planet for centuries, was finally dead. Sayla stood nearby, her glowing amber eyes scanning the room, taking in the remains of the battle. She didn't speak at first. There was no need. They both knew what had just happened. The creature had been a threat to everyone, but it was over now. The nightmare had ended. Dane wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him. His muscles ached, his head felt heavy, and he couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just the cold, it was the sheer relief of knowing they had survived, that they had won. Selah finally turned toward him, her eyes softer now, no longer filled with the same fierce determination they had carried moments earlier. She knelt beside him, her expression one of quiet understanding. "You saved us," she said, her voice gentle but full of emotion. Dane exhaled, looking at the ground. "I didn't do it alone." He turned to meet her gaze. "You fought beside me. You helped me get here. We did it together." Selah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I never imagined my people would find someone who could finish what we started. The humans who came here long ago, they couldn't stop it. But you," she paused, looking at the remains of the creature. "You stopped it." Dane didn't know how to respond. He hadn't felt like a hero. The fight had been about survival, nothing more. He had acted on instinct, on the need to protect himself and Selah, but it felt different now. Standing in the quiet aftermath, with the threat gone, he felt something he hadn't felt before, a sense of accomplishment. But there was still one question lingering in his mind. "What happens now?" he asked. "The creature is gone, but the planet, this place, it's not safe. What do we do?" Selah stood up and looked around the cavern, her gaze distant. "I do not know. My people have always lived with the fear that the creature would awaken again. It's something we've carried for generations." She sighed, her voice heavy. "But now, there is a chance for something different." Dane raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Selah turned toward him, her expression calm but resolute. "This planet can still be a home. For me, for my people, for you, if you choose." Dane's heart skipped a beat. "You're asking me to stay here?" She nodded. "You've seen this planet, Dane. You've seen the beauty it has. The mountains, the ice fields, the stars above. It is more than just the creature that lived beneath it. It has history. It has life." Dane looked around. The silence of the cavern almost peaceful now. The battle was over, and the reality of the moment was sinking in. There was nothing but the quiet, the cold, and the chance for something new. He had come to this planet as an explorer, not expecting to survive, let alone make the new life here. But as he thought about it, the idea wasn't as terrifying as it had once been. Maybe this was a second chance, for both of them. "I don't know if I can stay," he said softly. "I came here to explore, to learn, but I never imagined." He stopped, realizing how much had changed since he first set foot on this planet. Selah smiled, a small, gentle smile that warmed the room. "You don't have to decide now, Dane, but the offer is there. You've earned it." The silence between them stretched for a moment, and Dane could feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The familiar world he had come from seemed so far away now. His ship was still stranded on the ice, and the galaxy felt 1,000,000 miles away. But here, standing beside Selah, the possibility of something different began to take root. He thought about what he had left behind. The endless searching for meaning, the unknowns that had always kept him restless. And then he thought of Selah, the alien woman who had fought beside him, the woman who had shown him a side of this world he had never seen before. "I don't know what the future holds," Dane said finally, his voice steady. "But I think I'm ready to find out." Selah's smile widened, and she reached out, offering him her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it held more meaning than anything he could have expected. Dane took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch against the cold of the cavern. A new beginning. The days that followed were filled with quiet rebuilding. Dane helped Selah with the tasks that needed to be done, fixing broken structures, gathering supplies, and exploring the planet further. As they traveled across the frozen landscape, they found hidden forests beneath the ice, filled with life that Dane had never imagined could survive in such a harsh environment. The ruins of the human expedition were scattered across the planet, but there was something hopeful about it now. It wasn't just a graveyard, it was a starting point. Over time, Dane found that he no longer looked at the planet with fear or uncertainty. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by the possibility of a new life, a new purpose. And Sayla became not just his ally, but his partner. Together, they began to explore what it meant to live on this planet, side by side. They built a new life, not just for themselves, but for the future that lay ahead. As the years passed, the people of Sayla's world began to trust humans again. Dane Carter, the outsider, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that sometimes even the darkest of histories could be rewritten. And in the quiet nights, under the stars, he would look up and know that his journey, his true journey, had only just begun.